YouTube, agora já está no YouTube, tá bom?
Posso começar?
Pode começar. All set?
Okay, so I'll go now. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. I'm Professor Alisson from the Federal University of Paraná, and we are gathered online to have the third meeting of our event, Applied Linguistics Q&A Sessions. This is an online event that is being organized by Professor Rosane Silveira from the Federal University of Santa Catarina and myself, with the support of the graduate program in English from UFSC and the Núcleo de Assessoria Pedagógica and the Department of Modern Foreign Languages from the Federal University of Paraná, UFPR. Today, Professor Ana Paula Beato-Canato and Professor Adriana Dellagnelo will address conceptions of language and teacher education. So prior to the session, our two guest lecturers were asked to prepare a presentation to discuss how different language conceptions influence teachers' practice. You can submit your questions and comments on Zoom or through the chat on YouTube. As perguntas também podem ser enviadas em português se você se sente mais confortável. And we will address all of these questions and comments later on in the session. Before we start, I'd like to thank the audience for the participation, for the interactions through the chat. Also, I want to thank all the lecturers who will be taking part in this event, in the upcoming sessions, and of course, Professors Adriana and Ana Paula, who are here with us this afternoon. I also would like to thank Rosane for the partnership in this event and the support during the transmission. She's a co-host in the session, and also Harissa, who has been our go-to for help every time we needed it. So Professor Adriana will go first, I believe, if I'm not wrong. So I'll introduce her first, and then when she's finished, I'll introduce Professor Ana Paula before her talk. So Professor Adriana de Carvalho Dellagnelo holds a PhD in Applied Linguistics from the Federal University of Santa Catarina. She is a professor at the Department of Foreign Languages and Literature at the same university, and she's also a professor at the English graduate program at UFSC. Her line of work investigates teacher education, pedagogical practices, and professional development of pre-service and in-service teachers, social cultural theory in language teaching contexts, among others. So thank you very much for being here with us this afternoon. Now we can dive right into the session. Thank you so much.
Okay, so my turn now?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. All right, so first of all, good afternoon, everybody. And I would like to thank Rosane and Allison for this invite. It is a pleasure to participate in one of these interesting lives that you've been promoting. Also, I would like to thank the participants for being here today. I do appreciate your trust. So let me share. Is that okay? Can you see the slide?
Yes, Adriana, we can see them.
Okay, fine. All right. So let me tell you, first of all, that when Rosane and Allison got in touch with me about this live, I shall confess that I felt a bit uncomfortable with the event certainly due to the novelty of the modality, but I was also enthusiastic about the prompt question, namely, how do different language conceptions influence teachers' practice? And again, I have to confess that my excitement was not because I felt very confident about the topic, but rather because the topic is complex, provocative, and certainly important to be thought of. So, having that said, I'll start by pinpointing that language is highly protean. And let me see, there you go, okay. It's been defined in various ways, and the main reason for that is that apart from being the object of study of linguists who look into it from different scientific perspectives, it is also a phenomenon that on the one hand people master it, and on the other it goes unnoticed for these people who actually use it casually and at times naively and carelessly. And if we approach these users and ask them what language is, they'll certainly come up with a definition. It is therefore this dynamism of language that gives it the complexity that I mentioned earlier. So obviously, we won't be talking about language from lay perspectives, but rather from a more scientific, yet simplistic one, because I'm bringing two very broad perspectives that are clearly different from one another, and that give rise to dramatically different assumptions about teaching practice. They are language as a system and language as social practice. Before then, I thus acknowledge at the outset that language conceptions are fundamental to the process of language teaching, and they do, or at least should, influence teachers' practices. From planning to selecting content and materials to teaching. But let me just make a brief digression here to comment on the modality I just used when I said that language conceptions influence or should influence language teaching. What I mean here is that at times, actually oftentimes, teachers state to have a given language conception, but as they enter the classroom in the shoes of a teacher, their behavior says otherwise. What happens in these cases is that teachers do not realize that their stated conceptions diverge from their teaching practices. And to me, the problem that leads to this mismatch is not too much theory or too little practice, as highly remarked, but rather too little concept, to use Vygotskian terms, and more specifically, a text by Cook and colleagues who talk about this too little concept. But what does it mean when I say that there is too little concept? What I mean here is that these teachers' pedagogical decisions, that is to say their practices, are not informed by their language conceptions and this dialectical movement between theory and practice, and again bringing Vygotsky, the confrontation between scientific concepts and spontaneous concepts, everyday concepts. It is essential for teacher professional development. So now, moving back after this digression, just moving back to the two conceptions of language, I will now particularize each of them. Let's start with language as system. So language as system is a formalist conception of language that sees it as an a priori abstract and autonomous mental system, independent of language use and language users. Within this conception, focus goes to formal descriptions of the system that consists of syntax, phonology, morphology, and semantics, and or another line of this formalist perspective, how the brain and mind, or mind actually, processes this system as in the cognitive paradigm. The study of text in this approach to language would not take context into account, meaning that notions such as culture, authorship, purpose would be disregarded. This conception of language finds its roots in Saussurian structural linguistics and was later taken up by Chomsky. And I believe that if I asked you to identify teaching practices based on this conception of language, you would certainly point to the teaching of the famous verb to be, right? We could also remember of activities in which students are presented with affirmative sentences and have to change them into interrogative or negative sentences. And actually, I guess we can say that this structure-based conception that privileges the teaching of linguistic forms has traditionally dominated the area of second language acquisition. But on the other side of the debate, there are those who conceive of language as social practice, but of course, as any new idea that comes into being, especially in when we're talking about science, this conception criticizes, they open criticism to what came before, right? So this conception emerged out of criticism against features of the former conceptualization, language as system. Laffert, for example, regarded students engaged in the former kind of instruction as decontextualized minds learning grammatical rules. And theorists of language as social practice also extended their criticism to mainstream second language acquisition researchers for taking the position that knowing a language means having knowledge about the system. As Johnson contends, even with the theoretical construct of communicative competence and the emergence of communicative approaches to language teaching that placed emphasis on language use as opposed to language forms, language continued to be conceived as a set of forms and rules. The difference was that attention was no longer given to simply learning about forms, but rather to using the correct forms of language. But still, focus was given to the correct forms of language. So according to adepts of language as social practice, knowing a language means using the language. And more than that, using it to adequately function in a wide array of contexts for a wide array of purposes. Language is seen to grow from experience with everyday practices and the way they are typically performed, which makes knowledge of language dynamic and situated within given contexts, within social practices. So learning a language, thus, is a social process that takes place in interactions between learners and speakers of the target language. Meaning, in turn, is situated in the everyday activities that individuals engage in. So it should be clear, however, that I'm quoting Jensen now, embracing a language as social practice perspective in L2 teacher education does not mean that L2 teachers do not need to know about the structural properties of a language. Having a meta-language about these properties may in fact offer useful psychological tools that teachers can use to make students aware of the various linguistic resources that are available to them as they begin to develop the capacity to function in the L2 world. But what is, But what is different about the language as social practice perspective is that instructionally, the point of departure is no longer the discrete form or communicative function, but the conceptual meanings that are being expressed that denote ways of being in the world. So unpacking this quote, what it says here is that language teachers are not exempt from knowing about the structural properties of a language, but that this knowledge has to be used in the service of meaning. So this means to say that it is not important that learners study modal verbs for the sake of studying modal verbs, for example, or that they learn that modal verbs do not require any additional auxiliary verbs when in negative, like I don't can go, or interrogative sentences, do I can go, nor do they vary in third person singular. She can go now. So all these things are wrong. But that's not the way we should go about teaching modal verbs. So what matters for those who take language as social practice is that they understand that modal verbs not only function to express ability, obligation, or possibility, but also to express modality and politeness. Non-native English speakers sometimes sound impolite to native English speakers, for example, and they don't understand why that happens. And this is because they often use language that is too direct. So even though these learners tend to add please to their requests, for example, they still do not sound polite. Learners may think that the sentence, please send me the documents, is polite enough. But what marks politeness in English is the use of modal verbs, not only the use of please, right? So could you please send me the documents would therefore be more appropriate and the more polite expression. So a Coke, please? No. Can I have a Coke, please? Right? But these are things that we usually don't see in textbooks. At least those that take language as systems, they usually don't bring this kind of information. And of course, in this case, in relation to modal verbs. So, as for modality, learners should know that between yes and no calls, there are levels of uncertainty representing degrees of probability, like it may be, it must be, and levels of intermediacy that represent degrees of obligation, such as you may do, you should do, you must do. And in the midst of using genres that require the use of modals, wherein this content would be focused on, learners will learn that modal verbs do not require any additional auxiliary verbs and do not vary in third person singular, right? So again, we do not mean, those who take language as social practice do not mean that students or teachers do not have to know the structure of a language, the forms, but they do have to learn forms in the service of meaning, right? That's the point. So, summing up, when language is conceptualized as system, the prevailing instructional principle is to teach forms and structures not yet acquired. Teaching practices are guided by definitions, classifications, rules, normalizations, at times dressed in texts, right, as pretexts. When language is conceived as social practice, the predominant instructional principle is to teach how to use the language in given contexts. Teaching practices, in this case, are guided by the use of effective texts conveyed in media that circulate socially and that have meaning for interlocutors. Language use, therefore, being situated culturally and historically. Language, according to this social practice conception, has no concrete existence outside interpersonal relationships. This is to say, outside interaction, right? So when I mentioned that in the conception of language as system, at times texts, at times the class uses texts as pretexts. What I mean there is that the tendency is that teachers bring texts, because this is very widespread, that we should start our classes by bringing texts. But the tendency that teachers have is to present the text and retrieve from that text one or two structures that they want to teach, that they want to focus on. And they forget about the text immediately. They just focus on these things. Most of the examples that we have in which they do talk about understanding, comprehension, interpretation is when they ask students to find information in the text. And then they tend to focus on the structure. And I'm going to show you an example of what I'm saying. So finally, in order to illustrate, that's the example, in order to illustrate how these conceptions influence teaching practices and therefore go back to the prompt question that motivates this slide, I brought an example retrieved from Johnson, 2009, for us to have a look at. As a means of contextualization, we will have a look at 2 email messages sent from 2 applicants, 1 American and 1 Chinese, to the professor in charge of the MA TESOL, Teaching English as a Second Language program at Penn State University. So here's example 1. And fine, here's example 1. So the first example is this email was sent. The subject of the email was questions about the MA TESOL program. Actually, the program is not TESOL, it's TESOL, because it's not for students of other languages. It's just teachers of English. So, dear Dr. Johnson, I was very pleased to learn that I have been accepted into the MA TESOL program. I plan to begin the program in the fall 4th term. Before arriving on campus, I wonder if it would be appropriate to contact my advisor regarding appropriate courses and other program requirements. Also, I wonder if 2 years to complete the program is pretty much standard for your program, or if the time can be accelerated. Since I applied fairly late and have no financial support from the university for this year, I would also like information about how I might apply for a teaching and or research assistantship for next year. If you could send this information to me at your earliest convenience, I would greatly appreciate it. Once again, thank you for accepting me into the MA TESOL program. I look forward to working with you in the very near future. Regards, Carter Marksman. Okay, so that is example 1. This is the American student. Now in example 2, we have the email that comes from the Chinese student. The subject now is, so sorry to trouble you again. And then it goes, hello, dear Dr. Jason. Today, when I gone to the post office to send the completed application materials to you, I was stolen. It is unfortunately that the applications also was stolen. Now, I'm afraid the time is not enough for me to apply. Then 1, please send me the application forms by email to me. Send the application forms by email to me so I can download and print them. It will be the fastest way. 2, if that won't work, please send the application forms to me by international EMS. But that means you or your department will pay the EMS fee for me. Then please tell me the name, address for receiving money order. I will return the EMS fee to you or your home department by money order after I receive the application forms. 3, if the time is enough, please send me the application forms by common way. I am sorry to trouble you because of my fault. Merry Christmas a bit earlier, Yiling. Okay, so these are the 2 emails. Now let's say that I'm teaching a class and then I'm using these 2 texts in order, or 1 or 2 texts in order to do my teaching, right? Now, how would teachers who take language as system behave with pedagogically, let's say? How would they behave pedagogically? In example 1, they would possibly ask things such as, what is the subject of the email? And then the students would go and find this information in the text. Then, who is the email addressed to? who's sending the email, what is the writer happy about, and these are things that learners could go and find in the text, right? They would possibly be asking how many, excuse me, how many interrogative questions are there? Are they correct? If yes, copy them here. If not, copy the correct form of the sentences and justify the corrections. So students would go back to example 1 and see how many interrogative sentences do we have here. We have here, I wonder if it would be appropriate to contact my advisor regarding appropriate courses and other program requirements. There is a question mark. And then again, I wonder if 2 years to complete the program is pretty much standard for your program, or if the time can be accelerated. Again, there is a question mark. And then just to let you know, what this is me saying, no longer Johnson. Okay, the texts are from Johnson, but the class, let's say, is my interpretation of what would happen with teachers who have a conception of languages system. So this would probably be what teachers would do with that kind of text in example 1, right? Now, they would also, now let me stop sharing this, and what I believe that would happen is that the teacher would teach the use of direct and indirect questions with activities such as the ones that follow. And then, and I'm saying that because of the question marks, the interrogative sentences that were used with the wonder, right? So I'll stop sharing here and let me see, share screen. Share another one here. Great. So the teacher would probably do something like this. Okay, so I just wanted to, let me stop sharing this and sharing my slides back. Got it? I believe so, right? Okay, so that's something that I believe a teacher who sees languages system would do. Explain the grammar of direct and indirect questions by focusing on forms, by focusing on the form of language, on the structure of language, and showing exactly what to do at first, right? Now, something else that could be done would be the teacher show slides like this with direct and indirect questions. Do activities, exercises such as this one, give students, hand papers to students and ask them to change the direct questions into indirect questions. Then in the past, simple present here, simple past here. So that is possibly something that they would do. And in relation to the second email, it is my guess, again, my guess, that this email would very likely not be used by a teacher who sees languages system. And why is that? Simply because it is not a symbol that contains patterns of what is understood as a good text in English, right? So I believe that would not be used. Now, if we think as language as social practice, those who see language as social practice, and now again I bring Jensen, what a teacher would possibly do would be go through discussions like, A, what is the communicative effect of the email message in example 1? If you were to receive it, what would be your impressions of the sender? Now, B, notice how the email message begins. Does it seem appropriate? What linguistic, discourse, pragmatic issues do you think the writer considered when beginning this email message? C, notice the overall rhetorical structure of this email message. Does it seem appropriate? What discourse features do you think the writer considered when writing this email message? Now, look, D, what grammatical, lexical, pragmatic features does the writer employ in writing this email message? What assumptions do you think the writer is making about the receiver of this email message? So when I talk about grammatical, lexical, we are talking about language, right? But before talking about language, we walked through the email thinking of meaning, thinking of communication, thinking of communicative effect that this email had on the receiver, right? Now, and then letter E, what do you think are the communicative goals of this writer? What grammatical, lexical, pragmatic features did the writer employ to achieve these goals? Now, with example 2, what is the communicative effect? Very much the same. Notice how the email begins, the email message begins. Does it seem appropriate? And then they would be talking about the way that the person says, hello, dear Dr. Karen Jason, not Johnson, but Jason, and they would be commenting this kind of things as well. Now, notice the overall rhetorical structure of the email. Does it sound appropriate? And then that would be letter C and D, not CC, but C and D would be very much the same. And then in letter D, you would have already locate 1 or 2 grammatical, lexical, and or pragmatic errors. Discuss why they are errors, what rules are violated, and how they affect the meaning of the message. So notice that even when the teacher talks about grammar, lexics, and lexical choices and pragmatic rules, they go back to meaning, right? And then in letter D, which is actually E because they're wrong there, rewrite the sentences with the errors identified above in at least 3 different ways, and then discuss how each version of the correct sentences alter the meaning of the message. And then Jensen also comments that a teacher who sees language as social practice would also talk about linguistic discourse and pragmatic features that may have influenced the writer's lingua franca culture. Lingua franca is good. It's just because of you, Jenny. Are you there? So, okay. Lingua culture. If so, what are they and what social significance do they play in this email exchange? Likewise, what linguistic discourse or pragmatic features might the receiver of this email expect to see? Then, this email message contains a request. Discuss ways in which you might teach L2 learners how to make a request in an email message. And then here you would be able to talk about different forms of asking or making a request, not necessarily asking questions, right? But making a request. And then you would be able to talk about direct questions and indirect questions. Now, rewrite the email message with appropriate linguistic, discourse, and pragmatic features. Be prepared to explain why you made certain choices over others and how those choices help to shape the meanings being expressed. And then finally, what does analyzing email messages such as these suggest about L2 language learning and teaching? This is actually for language teachers, right? This is not Jensen. I retrieved these examples from Jensen in a book about second language teacher education. So in this letter D, she is now talking about the teachers who will future teachers, who will be future teachers, and she is talking about she is aiming at making them realize the importance of looking. Oh my God, that was not me. I'm sorry. Okay, so. I don't know what happened here. Just because I touched the screen and then, well, anyway. So the idea is that teachers have very clear for them the importance of working with language in terms of meaning, putting meaning together with forms, right? And that's where I stop, actually, hoping that this talk has been insightful and can be useful for some of you. All right, so I have here, the references, and then a thank you note. Okay, and here I stop. Alison.
Thank you very much, Adriana.
Thank you.
It was a lovely talk, very informative for all the teachers who are watching us. We will take questions later on. There are some questions here were sent for you, okay? Now I will introduce Professor Ana Paula. Professor Ana Paula Beato-Canato holds a PhD in Language Studies from the State University of Londrina, here in Paraná. She is a professor at the Department of Modern Foreign Languages at the Federal University of Paraná, and a professor at the Letras graduate program as well. Her research agenda includes discourses about education, hate speech, analysis and development of didactic materials, and also teacher education. I was very happy to introduce Ana because Ana is a dear friend of mine at UFPR. That's why I was smiling. So thank you very much, Ana, for being here. And now let's listen from Ana Paula Beato-Canato. Thank you.
Okay, so should I start by sharing here and then I thank you? Yes? Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very
Yes.
well, Ana. We can see your slides.
All right, so I'd like to thank you, Alison. Now I can see you. Oh, is it like that? I can see on my screen and me, yes?
Yes, that's correct, but we can see you. Everything is working perfectly.
So I'd like to thank you, Alison, first of all, because of our friendship and our relation. I know I was invited because of that. And also I'd like to thank you, Rosane, and Adriana. It's a pleasure to meet you and dialogue with you for the first time. So I'm really honored to be here and a little bit anxious and nervous because it's so different to talk about anything and don't see people, but let's go. Well, where is it? So this is the title of my presentation, Language Conceptions and Teachers' Practice. I decided to start by showing you some images and asking you to please analyze what guide its interpretation, its narrative. So based on the question I've received by Alison and Rosane, that was, how do language conceptions inform our teachers' practice? I decided to show you these images to think with you about how each conception guide our interpretation of society, of language, and education. I've asked so many questions to myself to think how I would guide this presentation, plan this presentation, and let's see if you go with me. I'll just show you the images because then I'll try to analyze them in my presentation, okay? So based on this discourse, these narratives, I decided to work with these questions. How do language conceptions inform our teaching practice? Are there neutral and ideological practice and teaching materials, neutral teaching materials? Are all practice political? Is it possible and necessary to create a critical atmosphere independently of our context? Why? How? What informed this discourse about education? What does language concept have to do with this? So here I decided to bring two different materials that, in my opinion, I analyzed them as based on two different perspectives. The first one, the one that is with verb tenses, I consider it focus on structure, and the second one on communication. So we have here a situation at the airport. Students should imagine that they were at the airport, and then they should listen to a video, actually watch a video, put the dialogue in order, and then role play the dialogue. So I asked myself, what is language here? And in my analysis, I consider that both activities work with this conception of language. Language as clothes or tools. What do I mean? Based on Fabrizio, 2014, and Ihaja, 2000, I consider that this perspective thinks that we use language. So we get a tool from the box that represents society, something that is neutral, transparent, that doesn't interfere on society, on us, and we use it to transmit information, to communicate something that you'd like to say to someone. In this perspective, our actions and language practice don't change language. And what is communication, in my interpretation, when we work with this kind of activity and this kind of conception of language? I consider that language would be based on communication would be this. We would have two persons. Here we have, the way I see them, two young white men transmitting information one to the other, directly from one head to the other one. So we have to help students develop a block of vocabulary and structure, and then they would be able to construct idea and transmit it. In this kind of classes, I imagine that what we talk or doesn't matter, or maybe it matters less than the vocabulary and the perfect structure. So what would be our job, or what should we have to be a good teacher? We should have good English, especially based on American English or British English, not Australian English, something like that. And what about learning and education? Learning would be as language. Education would be transmitting information from one head to the other. So teachers would transmit information from their heads to students' heads, and then students would develop knowledge. When we talk about communicative activities, we may think that this is too much, that my analysis, that I'm not being a good person to say that. But I think that even when we think about communication in this activity at the airport, what we have here is autonomous literacies based on street. That is autonomous knowledge. So the social practice is not part of it, because we are not worried about who we are talking about or what are the roles that we assume in this context, who we are, who our students are, and things like that. For me, this kind of activity would help with this perspective. Our schools are, in a sense, factories in which the raw materials, children, are to be shaped and fashioned into products. The specifications for manufacturing come from the demands of 20th century civilization, and it is the business of the school to build its pupils according to the specifications laid down. So we have students that would think about the airport as something that they desire, they wish, they want to be there, they would like so much to be there. And maybe they would like to be that white young man, especially from Europe or the United States, maybe not a Brazilian guy from a district, I don't know, from, for example, if you talk about Rio de Janeiro, not from Copacabana, but from somewhere else in the other side of the bridge, the way we call. So what are the common results or expected results when we talk about education in this sense? What we usually have are boxes. They all get put in boxes and they will come out the same. All the students, what we desire is this: put students into box and help students to be able to go to the airport and act correctly there. And now I let you read this Mafalda's text here to think a little bit about this. When we trust too much in education, there's no space for thinking, problematizing, asking questions. But then we have this question: who really benefits when every child on the planet is educated in the same way? I think this question should guide a more critical perspective for us. I ask this question every day of my life, especially inspired by so many Brazilian applied linguists such as Moita Lopes, Fabrício, Jimenez, Jordão, Menezes de Souza, Celane, and so many others that help us realize that we have to ask questions every day. Who we are? Who are our students? What can we do in classes? What can we do in society? So, thinking about this, I ask this question: are there other possibilities? Can we work with language in different perspectives? My answer is yes. By now, I'm influenced by those authors that I mentioned, and also Penny Cook, Boaventura de Souza Santos, Grossfogel, and so many others. And I realize, and I think that, yes, we should think otherwise. We should try to think otherwise. I realized that research is political, education is political, language is political, we are political beings. And so we can try at least to do something different. So going back to the activity about the airport and having this perspective in mind, what could you do? I think that we could ask questions such as: do you see yourself in this context? Do you usually travel? How often? Who usually travel? Where do people usually go? Why? Where would you like to go? Does this unit make sense for you? Why or why not? And maybe if you don't have a material that the school imposes us to work with, maybe not working with at the airport should be a better idea. I would think about social practices that make sense to my students and help them problematize their context, our context, our lives, different contexts. So trying to think otherwise, I base myself especially on Voloshinov and Bakhtin to talk about language as social practice. So we act with language in language. Language is social, it is ideological, it's historical because it's constructed while we use it. So it is ideological because ideology for me is a reflection of social structures. It is not constructed previously. It is constructed in our interactions. So for me, there's no neutral possibility in interaction. Everything we say is part of a chain linked to other discourses. I say a text based on something else or many other things that were said and that I've read, and also thinking about what I expected. As here, for example, I'm thinking about what you are reflecting, if you agree with me, if you are not agreeing with me, what's going on, because I don't see you. And this is also common, but not in a situation like that, right? So this matters. This is really important and helps us think about a presentation or a phone call, a message, anything. And so it's not neutral at all. We are social beings, and everything we do thinking about me and the other. Who the other is for me and who I am for the other. This means that contexts are dialogical. They are deconstructed in our responsive attitudes, considering the interlocutors, the other for me and I for the other. Talking about literacies as social practice. So Street discusses the ideas of autonomous literacy in opposition to ideological literacy, to advocate for the existence of only ideological literacies. The autonomous idea exists to naturalize and legitimate some principles, usually based on a weird society. So, based on Street, Voloshinov, Bakhtin, and all the others that I've mentioned, all our practices are social and epistemological, are based on social and epistemological principles. They are ideological, social, cultural, ideological relations. As we are part of this colonized society, it's very common that we base ourselves on this weird society. That's what we have to base ourselves to criticize, to question, to problematize, to think otherwise. And what is this? Western educated, industrialized, rich, democratic society, also white, male, strong, and young. Based on Pennycook and Grossfogel, I think that we can work in class in favor of the discussion of exploration and oppression, thinking about the construction of less oppressive and better context to live, less unequal. So, thinking the time that we are living now, we are facing, it's a very critical time. We are invited to think otherwise. All schools, everyone is thinking about this. What could you do? What can we do? Can we do? So we can see very clearly the inequalities and the necessity to develop our capacity of unveiling how and why society is the way it is. What we can do as professors, we can work with a critical and plural teacher education and research. critical in the way that, in the sense that we have to question all the time. Do I see myself in this context? Why? Why not? Where am I? Is this context fair? Isn't it? What can I do to change it? Thinking that schools are social institutions, they have the same role. And they're also plural, because it involves different points of view, different cultures, peoples, discourses. So what do we need? How can we do that? One step focuses on teachers' education to understand our role, responsibilities, and possibilities in the construction of our social realities. Thinking about that, Alison, Clarissa, Ju, Alessandra, Edu, Chico, I think all of them are there. Regina, we tried to develop a different curriculum based on the studies of applied linguists, our research and of our colleagues. And then we decided to change from one perspective to another one. In the place of English 1, 2, 3, we started working with thematic laboratories, like these ones that you can see here. So we believe that based on this curriculum, we are able to discuss what matters in society. We are also able to show students that we have no answers for everything. We don't have the truths in our hands. We learn and develop with them, and we try to help them to develop themselves, their discourse analysis, and try to do the same with their students. And what about in our classroom? What can we do? The first step is this: welcome differences, seen as norm and not exception. Engage students in the process of planning the semester, negotiating themes and kinds of productions and materials. Work with different material and themes focused on human relations. Example, a material about prejudice. We can discuss, for example, in this one, I put here to show you that I've worked with that book written by Maria Aparecida Ferreira, that brings narratives about prejudice, Black prejudice, and then we discuss them and think how we can construct a new context, new realities, and how we are part of this process. We have to decolonize society, and we have to be aware that we are part of this society, and it's also our responsibility. Read critically, have space to develop our subjectivities, be aware of our role in the construction of our social realities, and imagine new and less unequal context. The point is asking questions, as I've exemplified with their report, with Maria Aparecida's material, and also we can think, for example, about The Risks of a Single Story by Shimamanda, in which students can see the video and then they can think about single stories they've faced or they've constructed and how they can change them. My students produced, for example, videos to show single stories they have created, and then based on our discussions, they started thinking about how they could help to change this reality. I decided to bring some materials from Brazilian writers, our colleagues, to demonstrate that, yes, we have read published materials that try to work on this perspective. This one was written by Reinildes Dias, Lena Jucá, and Raquel Faria. It was first published as Prime, and now we have High Up and then New High Up. This one was not approved by PNLD, the first ones were. And here we have the unit, Are You More Human Than Me? And we can see here that the objective of this unit are not focused on language, exclusively, but language is there. I mean language in the sense of structure and vocabulary. So what is language here? Language is social practice. So we can think about who we are, who are the others, what we do, how we can read cartoon critically, what kind of questions we can do in class to help students to be more critical. And then here we have one point here that talks about modal verbs. Here students have contact with different genres and different questions, allowing them to think about the context, think how they would feel in each context, and how they could write, react, and practice, and have contact with people and society. This book has been analyzed by my student in her research. It's a Spanish book that is approved by PNLD, as you can see. It was written by Luciana Farias and Elzimar Costa. And the first unit is this one, in which we can see the inverted map, and that is a piece of art by Latin American artist. And also we see here many other Latin American artists that not usually appear in Spanish books. This other one was written and published by a very dear friend of mine, Rogério Tílio, from UFRJ. And this unit talks about family. So we see here many different kinds of family. And the first question is, when you think of family, which words come to your mind? Write them down. Can you see it? And below we have this question, can you see your family in these images? And so students would have the opportunity to see them in the published books, feel themselves there, understand that they're part of the society, they're not the exception. And in my opinion, this kind of work can help students to think otherwise and believe that, yes, they are part of this society, they are not exceptions. And then we empower students. So, I'm almost there. We have here discourses in conflict. We have different comprehensions of language, education, and society that guide the circulation of different discourses. Why we have this unit here showing us different kinds of family, here we have Escola Sem Partido saying that my family, my rules. And usually we have only one kind of family, that is daddy, mom, and 2 kids. We can see here a white family, and we can put other characteristics here. And so while Escola Sem Partido says that we take ideology class, so we are the bad part of society because we are ideologizando our students. What we as researchers against this kind of project and ideology, we say that it's just the opposite. We can have a plural society or a society that has only one perspective, and we have to choose the side we are. We can be with the ones who have only one perspective, or we can be with the ones that see a society as something so complex that we cannot divide. And what can we do in these critical times? Never, never give up. We have to remember all the time why we are where we are, why we decided to be teachers, and how we can do to do something. one of the necessary conditions to think right is not to be too sure of our certainties. So again, I'm not saying that I have the right answer. I'm just saying that I based myself on some authors that helped me see the context and language in this way. And I advocate that doing this, we can help the construction of more complex and plural society, or actually understand that society is like that and we are part of it. And then we can act with less prejudice and fight against our own prejudice every day. That's what I believe and what I'm trying to do a little bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ana Paula. It was a lovely presentation. I'll now move on to the part of the session in which we take questions and talk a little bit with the audience. Many of our students from UFPR are here. Many from the PPGE students are here as well. Some of your advisees, Adriana, are here. Your advisees as well, Ana Paula. So this is a very, very lovely and special audience. Many friends, Danielle is here, Professor Clarice is here as well. I'll start now. I'll ask Adriana then to open her mic. I'll start with the questions that I retrieved from the chat on YouTube. So the first question is addressed to Adriana, and this question is from Clarissa. It reads, Adriana, when we say that we use language, doesn't it approximate language to some sort of an instrument to be used as if it was independent from its user? If it is a social practice, wouldn't it be better to refer to practicing language and to practitioner rather than user?
Okay. I don't see it that way. I think that language is an instrument of interaction. And when we talk about interaction, we are already talking about users, because there, as I said before, I don't see language without users, without talking about language use. I like practice as well. I think it's totally fine. But I don't see the problem in using language use or language users. Did I answer the question? I am very much like, I do see language as an instrument of interaction, an instrument of thinking, that allows us to think, that helps us think. So I don't see the problem of use language.
Okay, thank you, Adriana. I'll go now. I'll take the questions from the Q&A. I don't know if Adriana and Ana Paula can see them from the Q&A. If I read them, you can't? Okay, so I'll read them. If you can understand them, I'll copy and paste into the chat. So I'll go for Ana Paula now, then I'll go back to Adriana, okay? Ana, this question is from Luana Balseira. She's a PhD candidate from PPGE, and she asks, Professor Ana, can you develop a little bit on the concept of context? Would it be the same as background? What should we, teachers, do when we have students with different contexts in a classroom in terms of more or less privileged contexts?
I think. What's her name?
Luana.
Luana, thank you for your question. So I think that when we have a context like this, it's a privilege. I've worked with this kind of context for about, well, since 2007, when I started working at IFRJ, Instituto Federal do Rio de Janeiro, in which I had students from Leblon and from Rocinha and everywhere. I think it's just the perfect place to be. Why? Because then we ask a question such as this one about the airport, and then a student would say, oh, of course I see myself there. And then the other one would say, I would never see myself then. And then we start talking, and then students will understand what role they have in society, where they are, what are their privileges or not, and what we can do to change this. I don't know if I answered your question, but we think about who we are, where we are, what we are there for, what we are talking about, what else? And then everything that is involved in this situation. And we demonstrate that we have no right answers. Each answer can be different based on our background, our experiences, where we are at that moment, and that where we are at that moment and all our experience constitute us, but not in a sense that as a block, as a box. As I tried to show in the end of my presentation, we have to open the box and leave the boxes. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Ana. Adriana, I see that you were nodding. Would you like to comment on that? No? Okay. So I'll go for Adriana again. So this question is from Fernanda da Costa Alves. She asks, Professor Adriana, do you think that teaching language as a social practice works in all contexts, or other methods, approaches might work as well depending on the context?
Well, I do think that it works in every context, any context, although I see that it is, I realize that it is a bit more difficult to apply it in certain contexts, such as regular schools. But I do not think that it's because regular schools would not take this kind of teaching. I guess it is a cultural thing. You know, teachers are so much into that culture of teaching a given kind of lesson that, as I said in my talk, when they enter the classroom in the shoes of a teacher, they automatically come with that kind of practice, which has to do with the teaching of grammar. But this does not mean that language as social practice kind of class would not fit into this context. I do think they fit. For example, the email that I showed today, that's not very difficult, right? And you could have even simple texts, even more, right? And I think that it can happen. You can make this happen. The only thing is that you learn that you should not use the text for as pretext, which is what happened here with the example that I tried to show. Like, teachers tend to show the text, ask some questions of finding information, which is from this cognitive perspective, from this more cognitive perspective, but still formalist. And then they go into structure, into grammar, and forget about the text. They don't go back to the text. And as I said, I think that we can do lots of things, including teaching language, because I think that we are language teachers. We have to teach about language as well. But we have to teach about language in the service of meaning, right? So go back to meaning, go back to meaning. Ask students, for example, if you're teaching, like the example that I gave, modals, ask them what kind of difference do they feel when one reads a Coke, please, or can I have a Coke, please? And let them learn that that makes a difference, right? Did I answer your question?
I think so, Adriana. If you didn't, maybe let's hope she says something, then I'll go back to you, okay?
Right.
Thank you. Maybe I have a question here now that maybe can be for the both of you, so you both may articulate an answer. It's from Celso José de Lima Jr. The question reads, how should English as a second language or English as a foreign language programs and or teachers select textbooks for classroom use in the perspective of language as a social practice? It has a little bit to do with what Ana showed at the end of the presentation, right?
Exactly.
So if you want to add something on top of what you already said, maybe Adriana can say something as well.
Okay. What I see is what Ana mentioned, right? She showed like those books from PNLD, right, Ana? And I think they are very much into this perspective. So I think they are very good.
Well, I don't know if I can add anything, but because I tried to bring some examples. So Celso, maybe you were asking how we could start. So let's talk about, for example, when I worked at IFRG. I use it to ask students, for example, what would you like to study? I started teaching them when they were in their 5th semester, and then I would ask them, what do you think would be good topics to be studied during this semester? And then we would talk a little bit about this, and then we would start classes. So we would get a material that was of the area of chemistry, for example, that students knew much more than me. So this is a point. When we have this perspective, we don't believe that we have to have the answers. So I would construct things with the students. So I would bring a text to start the discussion about that topic, and then I would work with that text, study the context, we study the author, the topic, how the ideas are put together, where the author is from, why he is talking about this topic, the way she is doing that. And then I would ask students to bring other texts that is related to that one. For example, in the same genre, something like that, or the same topic. And then students would interview their professors about that topic. They would focus on criticizing that text and that topic and establishing relations with other ones. Nowadays, I work at UFPR with first comers. So last semester, for example, I worked with Chimamanda. So we wanted to talk about how single narratives are constructed in our society by the repetition of ideas. And then we started by watching her video, asking questions about the video. Students would ask questions about the video, would ask questions about the language, the structure of the language. We would work with questions and answers. Then they would interview someone, think about single stories in their lives, and then start planning a video, producing the video. We would watch the video, we would ask questions about that video, and then they would go back to their own narratives and analyze how those narratives were constructed and why. We would try to problematize the topics and also get in contact with the genres that are important for them to learn social practices that are related to their own contexts. I don't know if I answered or... Okay.
Thank you, Ana.
Thank you.
Ana, the next question is also for you. I have two more questions for each of you, two for Ana Paula and two for Adriana. Ana, the next question is also from Luana, and I will add a follow-up question.
I can't hear you.
Oh, am I muted?
No, I can hear you.
I can hear you too.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Start again, sorry.
No, it's okay. Don't worry. We are getting used to this, right? I said that I have two questions for each of you.
No, again.
For Adriana and Ana. Oh, you're not listening to me, Ana?
I don't listen to the question. When you continue, I can listen to you. Oh my goodness.
Okay. I'll read the question, okay, Ana?
Okay.
So this is a question from Luana Baltzeira, and I'll read the question and I'll add a follow-up question to that one, thinking that we have many students here with us. Luana asked, Professor Ana, she code switched, o que você entende de leitura crítica? E aí eu quero acrescentar uma pergunta ao seu entendimento de leitura crítica. When you were presenting, you said that we need to criticize the text. So maybe you could develop a little bit on your understanding of critical reading and explain, thinking that we have many students here, what it means to criticize a text.
Okay, so criticize doesn't mean point negative aspects of the idea. We don't have to disagree with the text, but we have to read a text and then think about it. Do I agree with this text? Why is this author saying these things the way he is saying that? Can I think about this in a different perspective? Why or why not? Why not? What makes me agree with this text? Why do I agree with it? Why am I interested in this text? Things like that. This is reading critically. So reading critically is reading, asking questions about the text, about the objectives of the text, about the uses of words, for example, getting the idea of indexicality. So what are the words that were used, and what do those words construct as an idea? We can have, for example, we've seen, I've brought the idea of our president is saying that all the time. What is it? Ideologizar, right? What does that mean? We have this idea in different perspectives. When we watch, for example, School in the Road, as I brought some aspects of it, we see one perspective. When the president or people from Escola Sem Partido says that we are ideologizando, they think in a different perspective. So all the words together construct an idea. It's not the idea. It's not the word. When I say educação, I attach ideas to education, and then I have an idea of it. In a text, when I use education, I also use other words together that inform my idea of education. When we put these words together, this is a good exercise to do in class to help students develop as linguist analysts. When we put these words together, students start realizing that the words were used and put together in order to develop a certain idea and not other. And this is another question that we can ask to be critical reading. What are the ideas that are not present in this text? Why not? Why do you think so? So basically, asking questions to ourselves, to our students, this is reading critically. Have I answered it?
Yes, Ana, perfectly. Thank you so much. The next question is to Adriana, and this question speaks to what Ana just said. It's from Alessandra Fernandes. She's our colleague, our friend from UFPR. She says, Adriana, do you understand questions of power, identity, and social relations also part of understanding language as a social practice?
I certainly do. I certainly do. And I was going to say when the students, the student, Luana, I guess, when she asked about critical reading and stuff, and Ana was commenting, I was going to say that critical reading is also looking at the unsaid, right? At what is not said. But then Ana commented on that. Okay, so what can you ask the question again?
Yes, it's about understanding power, identity, and social relations as language as a social practice, as part of language as a social practice.
Yes, I do. I do understand that it's part of language as social practice because when we use language, when we interact with people, we do have relations of power. We do construct our identities as we use language, as we are critical about language, as we think about language. So I do think that is part of language as social practice. Yes, I do think that people who see language as social practice can also work from that perspective. Was that the question?
Yes, Adriana, thank you so much. Ana, would you like to comment on that question as well?
Sorry, I was paying attention to what she was saying, but I forgot the question.
It's okay. I'll repeat it to you. It's about questions of power, identity, and social relations in understanding language as a social practice. You can focus on one if you want to. It's a very ample question, right? But
yes, I think I haven't used the word power today. I use it critical, but yes, power is part of our social relations. Someone who can travel, usually seen. I've watched the video that students should watch to do that activity that I showed you. And then we had a white guy, young guy, who would travel. So what social relations we have there? We have also power there. Power is part of our relations, right?
Even with the emails that I presented, like when I talked about the modal verbs, modality, like the questions that the guy did, the questions that the Chinese person did, there's a lot to work with social relations there and power. So I wonder if, and in the other email, the Chinese person, there's not this social relations are not so power, let's say, it's not so marked in the Chinese text. So we should teach them to look at this as well. Think of, when I say look at, I mean think of relations of power, social relations in general, when they speak, when they use language.
One thing, I totally agree with you, Adriana. I was thinking about, for example, when my boy, he's 7 years old, he started having classes, and then the teacher used to say, you have to be seated, you have to ask to go to the bathroom. And then parents started complaining about that. Oh, no, they can do whatever they want. They can go to the bathroom whatever they want because they are at home. And then we had a meeting, and one of the points discussed was that, and the teacher and the principal were talking about this, the social relation, the power relation, and how we as parents, we imagine that our kids are there having classes and they are in a room that is closed. So if they don't open their camera, teachers don't know what's going on and they feel responsible for that. If the kid just go to the bathroom and teachers don't know, and then we don't know if the kid is there, if the teacher is seeing our kids, is problematic. So it's social relation, it's power relation that we have to teach kids to deal with. And so we have to teach our students, but also problematizing this relation as well, of course. Not just saying, okay, go there to the box and acting this way.
Thank you, Ana Paula. The next question is Professor Adriana. It's a long question, Adriana. I'll read it to you and I'll help rephrasing, okay? This is from Christopher Zanchetti. You are showing us 2 examples of emails written by people from different cultures. Do you think it would be a good opportunity to talk about high and low context cultures as an intercultural communication? Since we are not simply using the language as a system, but mainly as a communicative tool.
Can you go back, Allison?
Sure. He mentioned that you showed the 2 emails written by people from different cultures. And then it's mentioning that maybe we should use these emails as opportunity to talk about high and low context cultures. So high and low context cultures as in intercultural communication.
Right.
To look at the 2 emails from this intercultural perspective. And then he also added, since we are not simply using the language as a system, but mainly as a communicative tool.
Okay. Well, I do think that we could, and that was actually my plan. So maybe I was not clear enough. When I showed those questions that we did, like what effect does this have on the receiver, on the person who's receiving the email, I would exactly show that in English, and then we would have interculturality there, right? In English, we are not as, let's say, assertive as the person in the second email is, because in the second email, the person says to Dr. Johnson, okay, now something like just summarizing what the person said, the person gave 3 options. Okay, you have 3 options. Send me the documents by blah, blah, blah. Send me an email with information, and send the application forms again so that I can apply if there is time, blah, 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 right? So what that shows, what those 2 emails show, is exactly this intercultural thing. And what we want to show is what is appropriate in one culture and in another. And one of the questions that are in the slides is, one of the questions there that is in the slide is, what has possibly, in reference to the second email, what is possibly one of the, no, let me go back, I'm sorry. Do you recognize linguistic discourse or pragmatic features of example 2 that may be influenced by the writer's L2 language culture, so which is Chinese, right? So this is exactly to bring this interculturality into the scene. So yes, I agree with you. I totally agree, and I think that that should be brought into the classroom. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Adriana. The next question is up to Professor Ana Paula. Ana, this question is from Daniel Ferraz. It's a long question, so if you need me to rephrase, just say, okay? So can you say to teachers, what can you say to teachers who were inspired by your talk and wished to design classes under Freirean perspectives and times?
My goodness.
Okay, we lost Alison's audio,
Yeah.
so I'll read the question, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
I thought it was mine.
No, it's all Alison this time. What can you say to teachers who were inspired by your talk and wish to design classes under Freirean perspectives in times where authoritarian top-down education are going on here? So he says, back to basics have been the outcome of it for education.
Hi, Danielle. Thank you for your question. Well, I've been thinking about this for about 3 years since I've started studying about Escola Sem Partido. And things are getting worse and worse. That's what I have to say. But I always ask the question, why is it getting worse? Maybe because finally what we are doing is having good effects. So what I have to say is, let's keep on going. Maybe we cannot just take very polemic topics as they would say they are, but we can ask questions about the airport or the hotel. Have you ever been to a hotel? Who is welcomed there? Would you be, how would you feel there? Who would you be there? And then we could ask other questions such as, we could work with families and then take a different picture of family and ask, is your family similar to this one? Or get numbers to demonstrate that, yes, we are talking about the majority, because the majority is not that image that I showed here, that they insist that it is the majority. So if we have to talk about neutrality, we would talk about majority. If we would talk about majority, we would not talk about father, mother, and 2 kids. Things like that. Maybe using numbers, start by working with some topics that are not considered so polemic, and believe that, yes, we can. Yes, we can, because we study, and we can empower ourselves, and we can empower students, and we can help to build better contexts. I think that's it. Okay, Danielle, I don't know if I answered your question. I think so.
Thank you, Ana. I think I'm online again, am I? I am, right? Okay. I had a internet connectivity problem. Last question is to Professor Adriana, and then we might head up to our final statements and close and conclude our session. So, Professor Adriana, this question is from Paola Biel. She asks, how can teacher educators raise teachers' awareness on the importance of language as a social practice, as the textbooks usually focus on language as a system?
Okay, what I think that the role of teacher educators is to make teachers aware of what they think and what they do. So I think that in our classrooms, we have to make students ask questions, like Ana said, ask questions to teachers. Of course, I'm not talking about the same thing that Ana was talking about. She was talking about a text and having students, for example, ask questions about the text. Now I'm going to have teachers ask questions about their doings and their thoughts, like, what am I doing? Am I doing what I believe that I should be doing? Why am I doing this? Or why am I doing that? So teacher educators have to make teachers justify their pedagogical options so that they are aware of their of possible divergences or convergencies between their thoughts and their actions, right? So I guess that this is very important to be done by teacher educators. Make teachers aware, make them reflect of what they're doing, and try to go back, try to take them back to theory, right? So, for example, they may say that they take language as social practice because that's what they do, that's what they've been doing, that's what they've been seeing. If they go to conferences nowadays, they will see pretty much critical practices, critical stances to language teaching, intercultural issues, but they many times do not realize that these things, that these kinds of practice do not go with language system, for example, and they don't see that. So they do this, they do this kind of teaching without realizing that what they are doing does not match the, let's say, the theoretical, epistemological, methodological contents that they've been having in their courses of letras, for example, in their letras programs, right? Did I answer, Paola?
Oh, Adriana, if she says anything, okay, I'll let you know, okay? But okay. I thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, before we do our closing statements here, maybe we could, Rosane, did you open your mic and because you want to say something?
Just final announcements.
Oh, okay. So go ahead.
But first I wanted to make a comment, because when I was watching Adriana and Ana Paula's presentations, I remembered when I was when I began my career as an English teacher, and I had to teach with interchange, right? The famous lesson of experiences, have you ever eaten sushi? And I remember I felt so uncomfortable because I myself had never tried it. And I was there trying to teach a lesson about something that I wasn't familiar with. So I think many of us have this sensation sometimes when we are in front of a textbook that we have to deal with, right? Because our employer asks us to do that. So I think it's so important that our students come out of our undergraduate programs aware that they can change things. They can question that book, right? The textbook, they can change it somehow. Thank you so much for your presentations and discussions.
Thank you, Rosane, for the invitation, you and Allison.
Okay, thank you. Some final announcements. First of all, about certificates in 10 or 15 days maximum. We are going to issue them and send them to email, through email to those who registered for this talk, okay? Also, I would like to invite people to attend our fourth session on August 24th. It's at 10 a.m. It's going to be the first one in the morning. And it's about multiliteracies and second language practice. And our guest speakers are Professor Alessandra Coutinho Fernandes from UFPR and Ana Paula Beato-Canato from USP. So I hope to see many of you here because it's a related talk. And thank you so much also, Alison and the audience, for being here. Bye.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you for your company here today. It was a pleasure. Your mic is off, Ana.
I'm sorry to jump in. Maybe let's take this moment to do some final conclusions and then we say our goodbyes. So if you want to leave maybe a take-home message. So Adriana, maybe, and then Joanna.
Yeah, I would say that regardless of the language conceptions that we have, that one holds, I believe that the role of language, the role that language plays in teaching and learning is huge, as it is for cognitive development, for example. So let's make sure that we take informed decisions as we plan and teach our lessons. That's it. That's my final message.
Thank you very much, Adriana. It was a pleasure to be here with you, to hear from you. And I'm sure that everyone profited from what you said, from what you presented here. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Ana, please.
I'd like to thank you very much again for the invitation and the opportunity of the dialogue that we've established with Adriana and the audience. Thank you very much for you to be here and the questions. And what I want to say is that we are all teachers. We, Adriana and I, we are here as teacher educators, but we are teachers. And what I think we have to do as teachers and as people is to problematize, ask questions to ourselves, study, research, inform our practice, produce theory, establish dialogue with social movements. I think this is one point that is very important. When Danielle asked me, I forgot to talk about that, and that's why I decided to ask to speak again. And dialogue with our colleagues, the ones who have the same ideas, different ones, and esperançar. And I'd like to finish reading this. É preciso ter esperança, mas ter esperança do verbo esperançar. Porque tem gente que tem esperança do verbo esperar. E esperança do verbo esperar não é esperança, é espera. Esperançar é se levantar, esperançar é ir atrás, esperançar é construir, esperançar é não desistir. Com Paulo Freire eu queria fechar essa fala, porque acho que nós estamos vivendo momentos muito críticos e poder estar aqui é uma oportunidade bem grande para a gente esperançar juntos e fazer alguma coisa.
Muito bom.
Obrigada. Obrigada, Alisson, mais uma vez.
Obrigada, gente.
Thank you so much. I will be back in 15 days with Alessandra Fernandes and Ana Paula Beato-Canato talking about multiliteracies, and I won't say anything else so that Ana's message from Paulo Freire resonates in our minds, okay?
Exactly.
Thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye. Ana, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.